Johnny Canzano. We're in the Puck Sports Studios. I'm doing, well, how do you think I'm doing? I'm doing freaking great. It's the Puck Sports Studios, of course, built by Limbach Lumber. John joins us every single week. It's brought to you by Zeke's Pizza, best selection of pizzas and local craft beers. Visit Zeke'sPizza.com. You can follow John on X at John Canzano BFT. Read all of his work at JohnCanzano.com. The radio show as well, The Bald-Faced Truth, in Portland on 750 The Game. I'm doing great, sir. That was just, I needed it. I think all Cougar fans needed the cleansing from this past weekend.
Yeah, are you just getting in right now? Like, are you just coming in from the game celebration right about now? What a catharsis. And I think for people who don't understand or haven't lived through the Pac-12 demise and the fear and the angst and the hand wringing, you wouldn't understand, sort of the emotion in the wake of that at that stadium, Lumen Field. And so I think in living rooms and across the Palouse and the Pacific Northwest, there were a lot of Washington State fans celebrating. And I do think there were some others who were not Washington State fans who were sort of nodding with approval, going, okay, there was a fair amount of justice in that outcome.
Yeah, it was, I think all the hand wringing, I think, going into the game about, fan apathy, certain people don't want the game to be played, mostly, Cougar fans. I was an early one of those people that didn't want the game played. I think with all of that, the weird start time, the ticket sales, were down. I always knew that there wasn't going to be 37,000 people there. I knew there was going to be a huge walk up. I think the announced crowd was just under 60. And once you got in there, John, it's what, with all of the BS that has been happening in the last year, and maybe I'm saying this just because we won, but I wasn't there for the entire game or just for the half, but for the 30 minutes that I was there, the hour and a half, whatever, it's what is everything that is right about college football, everything. And you didn't, for the time we were in there, wasn't realignment, wasn't portal, wasn't NIL, wasn't any of that stuff. It was just two football teams, a state divided, and a rivalry. What makes college football, was one of the best sports ever.
And it was a real contrast for me from the game going on in Corvallis with the Civil War, who, that game, you take away the fact that Jake Dickert stayed. He made the comment in the post game. These guys stayed for this. And I don't know if a national audience watching on Peacock understood what he said and meant by that, but he had players who could have jumped into the portal who stayed. He was a coach who stayed. The comments he made in the postgame about retiring the trophy, coming up with a Pac-12 Big Ten trophy. I mean, he was sort of signaling like an era ended and an era ended with a Washington State win. Conversely, Jonathan Smith left Oregon State. 26 players jumped in the portal. The scene at Racer Stadium was very different. It was evidence of, what was lost, the continuity that was lost. And so I don't think enough credit goes to the Washington State players who stayed at Washington State, stayed true to their coach, stayed true to the mission, because you don't win that game and you don't have a fifth-year senior linebacker making that tackle on fourth down if all those guys get in the portal and say, hey, there's greener pastures somewhere else. Because at Oregon State, the game was not competitive. Oregon ran away with it. It had a real weird feel even before kickoff. I think everybody kind of knew there were no stakes. There was no Rose Bowl at stake. There was no, it was double-digit underdog Oregon State, 20-point underdog to start the season. And I think everyone kind of expected Oregon's talent and athleticism would ultimately win out. So credit for the Oregon State players who played and Oregon players who played, but it didn't have that feel of the Apple Cup because those Washington State kids, they stuck around. And conversely, Jedd Fisch is the new guy, and he's trying to get continuity. And Puck, I told you, the game being in week 3, huge advantage for Washington State. Washington did not have its stuff together.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I'm gonna say, because I've heard that, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think Washington State can beat them by more at the end of the season. I don't think
possibly.
I don't even think they have scratched the surface yet of how good they can be. John Mateer was making his third career start. Yeah. Conversely, Will Rogers was making how many starts? 50 plus?
Yeah. Mateer was the best player on either team. I mean, he is a gamer.
Yeah.
I don't, I get it. Like, he's in the Pacific Northwest, he's in the Pac-12, but I have a Heisman vote. And I have to tell you, like, I thought, okay, he's on my radar. Let's see what he does the rest of the way.
Yeah.
Because that guy is more valuable to his team than maybe anybody in the country.
And again, this is not, I mean, I know it's going to be a criticism of Cam Ward, but I've said it multiple times. I'll say it again. If Cam Ward plays in that game, they don't win. They're just two different quarterbacks. They just are. And they play differently on the field, but they lead differently. And one leads by example and did lead by example. And they rally around him and they feed off of him. So I don't think they win that game just because you go back to the game last year in the game that they had opportunities to win, but Washington just made plays at the end. Cam Ward could have been the difference maker with using his legs and he didn't. And I think for Washington State, that was the difference. He was the X factor going into the game. Washington State has never had that type of quarterback, and any defense, and Steve Belichick, whenever he addresses the media this week, will probably echo the same thing. It's the most difficult thing in football to defend is a guy that can move when he's playing quarterback.
Well, not only that, he's willing to stick his nose in there. And it does worry me. I think he's going to have to be careful. And when, first down, touchdown, or get down kind of mentality, in some running situations, but he is such a weapon running the football that you need him to be out there doing that. But you're going to need that guy. Dare I say it? You guys are already talking about it. Well, if Washington State is going to make a run towards a college football playoff berth, and I think their schedule lines up in a way that kind of suggests that they could be a player here for an at-large berth, you need John Mateer healthy. So the question for Jake Dickert is, how do you keep that guy healthy while also playing to his strengths? Because you need him to stay aggressive, be aggressive, and look for opportunities, but you also need him to stay healthy.
Yeah, it's a hell of a balance. I asked that to Dickert last week. How do you guard against that with him? And his response was, I understand you want him to slide, you want him to stay safe, but he said, on the flip side, I can't change who he is.
Right.
That's who he is. But you're right. I mean, you look at the play where it's funny. He's the one who injured Carson Bruner.
Yes.
He knocked Carson Bruner out of the game, their linebacker, their best player on defense. But again, it's a play like that. You do that and you pop out a shoulder, and then their season changes dramatically. And they've got to guard against complacency right now. They've got to guard against everybody talking about him. They had a similar situation like this last year. They're flying high. They're 4-0, and then there started to be these rumors about Dickert and Michigan State and all of this. Is he going to leave? And they went down the tank. They couldn't recover. And I'm just going to be real curious. It's a different schedule, different opponents. I understand that.
100%.
What does Jake Dickert learn from last year that's going to help him this year to guard against these guys not overlooking anyone and getting just getting fat and happy right now?
Yeah, and you can't do it at any point of the schedule. I don't care who they're playing. You just can't afford that. You see it in the NFL, you see it in college football. If you don't show up to play, you get punished for it. So if it's a Friday night game with San Jose State, you got to show up. If it's a trip to Boise, you got to show up. San Diego State, you have to show up. I do think it's a little concerning that the top 25 voters in the AP poll are not paying attention to what's going on. You beat Texas Tech, you beat Washington. Those are quality wins. I think they're one of the best 25 teams in the country. But, over the course of the season, they will be impossible to ignore. If Washington State is 7-0, 8-0, 9-0, nobody's ignoring them. If they go perfect, they're in the playoff.
Yeah, you need now in a weird way you want to pull for Washington. You want Washington to perform well now. Yeah. You don't need Washington to start tanking it and being a sub 500 football team. All right, one of the biggest storylines obviously from that game is going to cut the decision there by Jedd Fisch on fourth down. I've watched a ton of Apple Cups, a ton. To me, it's one of the single worst calls, if not the worst call in Apple Cup history. He admitted after the game, I screwed up. However, on Monday, he kind of reversed course and basically said, no, it was the right play call. We just need to execute better. Your thoughts on that fourth down play?
Well, it's a bad call, because it didn't work. It's that you're the coach. That's your job to put your team into position to execute. And what bothered me is I went back and watched the replay of the game, and I was looking for a sign at some point of the first 3+ quarters that that was the right play call. And I didn't find that at any juncture of the football game. I didn't see it. I don't like that it went to the short side of the field. I don't like that there was a tight end over there. I don't like that the quarterback didn't look comfortable in that position. You know, maybe he was trying to catch the defense by surprise, but look, if I'm Nolan Ryan, I don't lose a no-hitter throwing a knuckleball. And to me, that was a knuckleball. Like, you know, don't throw an off-speed pitch here. I'm throwing my best pitch in that situation. And I don't think that was Jedd's best pitch. And I think he knows it down deep. But I think, you know, he's saying what he has to say. I also think, look, you know, yeah, you can look at a number of other times in that fourth quarter where they stepped on their own foot, or they jumped off sides, or they had a bad penalty, or they failed to make a tackle, or they don't get to Mateer. Yes, they lost that game in other positions, but any football coach in America will tell you the ball's on the 1.5 yard line. This is fourth down in the game. You're going to the best play in your playbook, and I cannot think that the quarterback running on an option in that situation is the best play. So ultimately it comes back to coaching for me. Jedd's going to have to live with it. And, you know, I know he was reaching for examples. He was talking about examples, and you could almost see him thinking through it. But the look on his face at the end of that football game on the sideline spoke volumes. He was not happy with the execution. I think if he could have the play back, he would call a different play. I don't believe that he would call that same play. So, you know, look, the bright side for Washington is this is a rebuild year. Fisch is, you know, charged with kind of a do-over, starting this program over. I know that there were some Washington fans that were upset last year when Kalen DeBoer left, that, you know, excited about what Jedd Fisch will do. I think he's the right coach. He was the right hire, but that was not the right call.
You know, a buddy of mine had texted me and just said, I think actually it was Jordan Reffett, who we do a show with, and said to me that his demeanor on the sideline gave off Mike Leach vibes on the Apple Cup.
Yeah.
And I said, if that's true, then you should be concerned, because I love Mike Leach, and Mike Leach was a great coach, and rest in peace, Coach Leach. Should be in the Hall of Fame. But the one thing that he didn't do a good job at was treating this game differently, because it's different. And everybody knows it's different. Every rivalry game is different. When Washington plays Oregon, Fisch is going to treat that game differently, and so is Dan Lanning. It's the way it is. They all know it. And if that is the case, that he just kind of treated it like, oh, we're just playing Weber, or we're just playing Eastern Michigan. Yeah, that's bad. You don't want to fall into that trap like Leach did in this game.
Well, I said it last week on this show that, like, Washington State knew the stakes. Washington State came in with a lot of emotion. The question was going to be, could they focus and channel all of that emotion? And certainly you saw the outpouring after the game. Yeah. You know what it meant to Washington State. I don't think it meant the same thing to a bunch of players who transferred into Washington and a coach who just arrived here, who's coached at a bunch of other stops. There's no way he could wrap his head around what it means. Maybe he understood in the course of 60 minutes and looking around the stadium and seeing the aftermath and the celebration, but there's just no way that you can comprehend that. It's institutional knowledge that only comes from being there and living through it. And so even watching it from a distance, you know, I've seen the Holy War with BYU and Utah from a distance. I don't understand the rivalry. I'm going to go to that game, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be surprised by something I feel and see, because I'm going to go, oh, this is what it's about. That's kind of what Jedd Fisch, I think, went through on Saturday.
I'm sure you saw Dickard, the post game on the field. I mean, there's so much to like about this guy, and I know Coug fans, we all get so paranoid. Oh my God, he's gonna leave, and it's just like you're dreaded, like he's not gonna be here forever. Yeah. You know, there's just something. And maybe I'm wrong, because I say this all the time with coaches. They're all professional liars. And so I've got to be consistent with that. There's just something, I don't know, real genuine about this guy.
Yeah.
It's just real genuine, and it comes across. And I think even other fan bases would say that about Jake Dickard.
Yeah, there's an authenticity about him that you can't fake. And, you know, he told me last year, while all this was going down with the Pac-12, that he had thought that he would coach for maybe 10 more years and then he would go do something else. And, you know, because it is a year-round thing. It's hard. It isn't what he wants to do for all of his life. Like, this isn't all he is. Talks about, you know, going to youth sports events with his family and his kids. So I think on the bright side, if you're a Washington State fan, this is not a guy who wants to be coaching when he is 60 years old and be on the sideline. That's not what Jake Dickert wants to do. So the question is, when is his next move? Where is his next move? Nobody's forever in this business. We know this now. It ends with him holding a cardboard box. Either he's been fired, or he's leaving to go somewhere else to take another job, or he's retiring. It just doesn't go on forever. So enjoy it while it's happening. Root for the success. Root for the idea that you saw a coach who had real emotion. Those were real tears in his eyes after the game. I don't know anybody else in the country, any coach in the country that's reacting that way in week 3, winning a football game. And so it means something to Jake Dickert. That's a great head start. That stuff can be glue. Don't worry about what you can't control. I sound like a stoic now, Puck, but you have to, it's the great stoic philosopher.
You are. I think when I think of you, I think philosopher. I do.
Yeah. Don't worry about what you can't control.
Just enjoy it. Yeah,
just enjoy it. Worry.
Yeah, just enjoy it. All right, I want to get to it. You have a story up there right now at johncanzano.com. Talk to me about Tulane and Memphis. It seems like it's heating up. These two could join the conference very soon.
Yeah, I want to say this. I don't expect anything imminent. The Pac-12, when it added Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, San Diego State, that move, I think, happened in a vacuum. A very small circle of people were involved in it. I think it's why they were able to keep it under wraps. This next move will include now 6 people in the room making a decision. And I'm told there's a meeting planned for midweek this week. I am also told that Tulane and Memphis are the obvious targets. I think a lot of your viewers and listeners already know that Tulane and Memphis make sense from a media standpoint, from an investment standpoint. Taking them from the American Athletic Conference also weakens that conference. Keep in mind, the top 5 highest-ranked conference champions get playoff berths. No conference has an automatic berth, despite what your friends are going to tell you. The top 5 ranked conference champions get those berths. So you've weakened the Mountain West Conference by taking those top 4 schools. You potentially weaken the American by taking Tulane and Memphis. It's part of why it makes sense if you're the Pac-12. It's a strategy play. You position yourself to get a playoff berth in most years, if not all years, moving forward. But, it looks like those 2 schools would be at the top of their wish list. Again, this isn't going to happen tonight, tomorrow night, but they are meeting midweek to sort of put their strategy together and discuss their next move. And those 2 schools are expected to be talked about. I also think they're going to look at UNLV. I reported this today that UNLV is not out of this. It just, the top 4 schools in the Mountain West were your highest priority. They locked those down. Vegas as a top 50 media market, a growing market, the so-called self-proclaimed mecca of professional sports, and have access to an NFL stadium, could be the 9th school. Yeah, they also have had some contact. The Pac-12 has had some contact with South Florida. I'm told South Florida initiated that. I'm still looking at South Florida as kind of a dark horse. I think it would be a bit of a stretch geographically, but does geography matter anymore in this new world of college athletics? I don't know. We'll find out.
Go ahead. It doesn't. I mean, it doesn't. But that's the one thing with Tulane and Memphis. I'm not excited about.
Sure.
Because I like the the regionality of it. That's why I like the Fresno and Colorado State and Boise State, because it's close.
Right.
You start adding Tulane and Memphis, now we're flying across country.
Sure.
Now, those are, I would say, from a road trip perspective, that would be awesome.
Right.
I mean, to go to New Orleans and go to Memphis. But yeah, then now we're getting away from West Coast football. But I understand it. They've got to add teams. UNLV to me makes perfect sense. And I'm actually, John, in a way surprised when they did it initially that UNLV wasn't a part of it.
Yeah, here's the reason why.
Why were they? Yeah, why were they not?
Right. UNLV shares a board of regents with Nevada. So you've got a real problem there if you're trying to be clandestine, if you're trying to be super close, tight-knit circle. You're going to have to go to the board of regents in the state of Nevada, and you're going to have to, ask them, hey, can UNLV leave? Can they split away? that's going to cause a whole, that's a whole can of worms, as we saw in Arizona with the Board of Regents and with the UC system with Cal and UCLA. There are just some things that are happening. Now, there's a precedent. This has happened before. 1994, UNLV went to the WAC, Nevada State in the Big West. Also, the governor in the state of Nevada is a UNLV grad. So, I'm not closing the door on it, but I think if you had tried to take 5 in that first bite, you might have encountered some problems. You certainly would have alerted the Mountain West Conference. I spoke with Gloria Navarez, the Mountain West commissioner, on last Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago. She was in San Diego for San Diego State, Oregon State. I can tell you that she knew that the Pac-12 was in contact, but she wasn't on high alert. And so I think if you try to separate UNLV and Nevada in that first bite, you might have encountered a counter move by the Mountain West that you wouldn't have been thrilled about. So I think they took the 4 schools that really wanted to be in the Pac-12, that were at the top of the conference. I think UNLV's in play, but in play for the 9th spot, not the 7th or 8th spot in the conference. So, I think that they ideally want 9 schools from a scheduling standpoint, gives you 8 conference games in football, creates a basketball scheduling advantage. And, in the 9th school there becomes, UNLV. Now, Air Force, people have asked me about Air Force. The American, I think wisely, is, charging towards Air Force because they already have Army and Navy. They make sense. It makes sense to keep those 3 service academies together. My media world consultants that I trust and know tell me like those 3 sticking together makes more sense. If you're the Pac-12, you want Air Force, you probably need to consider Army and Navy as well. And I just don't think they have the appetite to go beyond 9 schools. So right now, I don't expect Air Force to be on the Pac-12's A list as far as taking schools. I think it's Tulane and Memphis, and then UNLV. And then beyond that, some schools like South Florida have popped up. But again, dark horse, long shot, going to Tampa, even though that's a nice media market, feels like it's a little farther away. But again, like you pointed out, if you're going to New Orleans, what's an extra leg to Tampa? I don't know.
And we have, just from the basketball perspective, I think we've talked about this before. You don't think Gonzaga is a reality? I do. It has come up in that Pac-12 circle, but keep in mind, what is driving realignment? It's football. It's football. It's football. It's football. It's media value and football. And so Gonzaga is, I think, going to bump up against the same problem it had when, it explored admission in the Big 12 or the Big East. Is, if you can't bring football value to the equation, everybody seems to want to say, hey, let's deal with that a few months from now. Now, I do think the Pac-12 has got an appetite now as this conference starts to form. If you get Memphis, you've got a really good basketball brand in Memphis. You've got San Diego State that played for the national championship 2 seasons ago. You got Colorado State and Boise State who have participated in the NCAA tournament. You're starting to put together a pretty good men's basketball conference that could have some additional value. Now, I would explore Gonzaga. I'd also look at a school like Grand Canyon. Even though Grand Canyon is going to the WCC for the 2025, I think Grand Canyon becomes an interesting school because it gets you into Phoenix. They don't seem to be afraid of risk. I think jumping after only 1 year in the WCC wouldn't be out of the question for that school. But I do think the Gonzaga, Grand Canyon, maybe St. Mary's question is one that comes after football expansion. So again, first, this second bite of the apple that we talked about, we've been talking about this for weeks. 2 bites of the apple. The second bite of the apple is this next football expansion phase. Is there anything new on Cal and Stanford? I mean, obviously the ACC has got to implode, but do you get a sense, even if it does implode, that they still would not be in play or would be?
In talking with sources at both of those schools, those former Pac-12 schools, a couple things come up. One is, you would need an implosion in the ACC to have those schools be interested and available immediately. And if that doesn't happen, it's a question then for 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years down the road. And I think it's why, Puck, the Pac-12 only wants to go to 9 and not 10, 11, or 12. I think they do want to leave some room, not just for Stanford and Cal, but the potential that UCLA gets tired of getting its teeth kicked in football, the potential that, the Pac-12 gets a better than expected media deal, the potential that, could there be second thoughts or buyer's remorse from some of the schools that went to the Big 12. I think they want to leave some room to grow there, and I think they want to stay nimble. So that, to me, is a signal that they think Stanford and Cal at some point may have a remorse. I'm being told, and this is the publicly, I think Stanford and Cal would both say this, that they really value the participation in the Olympic sports. They feel like they can get that in the ACC. Again, they have not endured the travel yet. We don't know what's going to happen with Florida State and Clemson ultimately. So maybe Stanford and Cal come back at some point, but I don't expect them to be part of this second bite of the apple that we've talked about.
How do you think, just looking, I'm going to go back to Washington for a quick second, and then I've got a question on the Apple Cup. Looking at Washington, what they've got now coming up ahead of them, Northwestern here at home, see if they can recover from, the beat down by the Cougs. And then they head out. Now this will be the first time, right? They are going across country all the way to Jersey to go face Rutgers on a Friday night. So we're going to have to listen to all the complaining about playing on a Friday night, traveling back east. And then they've got to then, come back and then it's Michigan, at Iowa, at Indiana. I think they sprinkle in a bye between those, and then home against USC, and then at Penn State. I mean,
that's 5 losses in a row. I mean, it's going to be tough for a program that has a brand new head coach. Anybody in America that's starting over with a new head coach is going to endure some of this pain, and continuity matters. Jake Dickert proved that on Saturday. But I think Washington, ultimately, Oregon and Washington looked at $60 or $70 million a year in media rights revenue, looked at the expansion, the college football playoff expansion payouts north of $20 million per school. And they said, to hell with tradition, we're running towards that. At some point, if there is sort of a reckoning and super conferences happen, and I think it's not really an if, it's more of a when.
Yeah.
There will be some regret. And I think there will be more regional conferences or divisions formed. And so ultimately, maybe this all works out where everybody kind of ends up back in a regional setting. But I think for the Pac-12 footprint, this was a really encouraging week with Washington State's win, and then the realignment sort of path being laid out, because I think the Pac-12 is going to pull into becoming the number 5 conference in the country in a clear way, and I think that is a good step for the Pac-12.
There is a concern from a couple of fans, but from some Wazoo fans on this, and I'm just curious. I don't think this would happen. It was a question that was asked, in someone from in our YouTube chat, just asking, could you see Washington wanting to get out of this series next season because it shifts back to Pullman? Do you see any scenario where that happens, or are they locked in here for the next 4 or 5 years?
I think they want to play this series. And I think all the Pacific Northwest schools need to play this series, not just from a rivalry standpoint, but from the economics of it. I mean, that game on Saturday turned into a nice financial moment for everybody involved, right? Oregon State was able to sell the rights to Fox. Yeah. You've got, the game at a neutral site this year, but it goes back to Pullman. It'll be part of the Pac-12's media deal next year. If you're a Washington State fan and you're advocating for them to give up a home game against a Big Ten opponent, you may need to pump the brakes a little bit and ask yourself, from a media rights standpoint, as the Pac-12 goes to sell their media rights package, that is a huge bonus that every other year that game's happening in Pullman, and every other year the Oregon game is happening in Corvallis. That is a huge bonus for those programs. And if you're only going to 9 schools for a conference, you're going to need the home games. You're going to have holes on your schedule. You're going to need to plug in 4 non-conference opponents, and having Washington as one of them is a huge advantage. And for the Huskies as well, look, there are a lot of schools in the SEC and the Big Ten that don't have to leave their state in non-conference play. They play, their home games, and then they get on a bus to go to a nearby rival, or they schedule 3 home games in the non-conference. For both Oregon and Washington, you're going to have the possibility moving forward that you don't leave your state in non-conference play. You're going to be doing enough travel in your Big Ten season. There are some advantages here that aren't just tied to, it's going to be a sellout when you have it as a home game.
You are the best. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the best guy in the business right there. John Canzano, johncanzano.com. All brought to you by Zeke's Pizza. He's the best. They've got great selection of pizzas and local Northwest craft beers. You can visit zekespizza.com. You can follow John on X at John Canzano BFT. Check out the radio show, Bald Face Truth, down there in Portland, Oregon. Again, he joins us every Tuesday. In case you missed it, it's always up there on YouTube, also Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast, and of course at pucksports.com. Where are you going to find? What else do we got going on today? What do we got find up on the website here, real quick?
Well, just more reporting on the Pac-12 front, the schools that are out there, and some of the logic and thinking that goes into it. I obviously am way down the rabbit hole on this stuff, and very interested to see what comes out of this meeting, this midweek meeting that the Pac-12 is having. They may not have, and I don't expect them to announce like Wednesday night, like Thursday morning, that they've expanded and they're adding schools. But I think we're going to get an idea of how serious this Memphis-Tulane pursuit is it how mutual it is, and are there some other dark horse schools that sort of enter the chat, like in the same way that UNLV and South Florida, I think, have entered the room, positioned as, kind of the next schools in. And then what will the American do beyond that? Yeah. And what's the Mountain West play? Is there a litigation coming? I talked to several Mountain West administrators who say that they expect that the conference is going to throw a legal punch back. Let's see what that is. What does it look like? It kind of explains, Puck, why those 4 schools that departed kept it so quiet, so tight-knit, didn't want to involve UNLV or anybody else. They just really, I think, were ready to move on.
You're the best. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Johnny.
Thanks, buddy.